Okay, it's about 1:31, so I'm sure folks will continue to join us. But I thought we should get started. So welcome to, can everyone hear me, by the way?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, thanks, everyone. So I'll start over. So welcome to Predatory Publishing in the Age of AI. I'm Amy Nanetto, a senior scientific editor in MD Anderson's Research Medical Library. If you have any questions as we go, please type them in the chat. I'll check in on it or answer your questions at the end of the presentation. We are recording the presentation and we'll send you a link to the recording, a copy of the slides, and the handout. And you can also just download the handout from the link that I posted in the chat. So before we get started, I'd like to do a poll. So a lot of us have experimented with ChatGPT and other chatbots, and I'm wondering how you've used them. You can select all the ones that apply, and you might need to scroll down. Okay, so I think you can see the results. We're seeing 86% of you used it for fun. That's honestly mostly what I use it for too. It writes good poems and things. 29% of you have used it to edit text written by a human, presumably you or someone else. Quite a few of you, more than half, using it to generate ideas. And a few of you haven't used it. Well, one of you hasn't used it. So hopefully this will give you a sense of what the sort of benefits and risks of using ChatGPT in scientific writing are. So what's going on right now with AI in scientific publishing? This is a changing landscape for sure. Journals have been using AI-based tools in their workflows for some time now. They use research integrity tools like Authenticate, which lots of you have probably used. More recently, they're using AI-enabled image authentication or image integrity tools like ImageTwin, Proofig. ImageTwin has a license. We have a license at MD Anderson for that now and are encouraging its use. They use AI to screen for fit with the journal's scope. They use AI-enabled tools to identify potential peer reviewers and facilitate the peer review process. So they've been doing a lot. But when ChatGPT was released a couple of years ago, it would be fair to say that there was a bit of panic as journals realized that whole scientific articles could be generated, in a matter of minutes. So they had to develop policies pretty quickly, but they are continually reviewing and updating and evolving those policies as the technology changes and as it becomes clearer what people can and can't do or are and are not doing with this technology. Unfortunately, there are mounting numbers of cases of inappropriate use of AI-generated text and images in published articles. This is happening both in reputable journals and in potentially predatory journals as well. Some have gone viral on social media. You may have seen some of these. Some have been picked up by the press, and it's generally kind of embarrassing for journals and for authors and their institutions. The three organizations typically set the editorial standards, including the ethical and authorship guidelines for biomedical journals. COPE, the Committee on Publication Ethics, the ICMJE, and the World Association of Medical Editors. And these organizations work with and alongside journals to help develop some standard guidelines for the permissible use and required reporting of generative AI. So there's 5 principles that these organizations and the journals have generally agreed upon. The first is disclosure at submission. So journals kind of vary on where and how you're supposed to disclose use of AI, but it does need to be disclosed. So authors should report what tool they used, including the version, how they used it. So if you used it to write code, if you used it for grammar polishing, those kinds of things. And it's a good idea to save, to get in the habit of saving the prompts and the outputs from generative AI that you use. Some journals are starting to ask for those as a supplementary file. So a good practice would be to keep them. AI cannot be an author on your paper. They do not qualify under the ICMJE guidelines as authors. So as you probably know, one of the criteria for authorship is an agreement to be accountable for the accuracy and integrity of the work and for addressing concerns about the work. And obviously an AI can't do that. Related to that, human authors bear the responsibility for what they publish under their names. So if you've used ChatGPT or other chatbots, you know that they are really good at fabricating information and sounding pretty confident about it. So if a journal allows the use of generative AI for writing, it's the author's responsibility to verify all the facts, all the data, make sure that everything is properly cited, that the references exist and are accurate, that there's no plagiarism, that there's no violation of confidentiality, especially of protected health information or intellectual property. In fact, you shouldn't put any confidential information in a chatbot at all. And that's MD Anderson policy as well. And you should be sure to remove any biased language that an AI that's trained on human language could insert. The fourth is that tools like spell check, grammar check, Microsoft Editor, Grammarly, those kinds of things, that's a normal part of the writing process that does not need to be disclosed. And finally, many journals are not currently permitting AI-generated images and videos. Some do. Some allow some kinds of figures, but not others, but mostly not. And then something I found out about as I was preparing for this presentation is called the Kangaroo Initiative. And that's a group of publishing professionals, authors, representatives of COPE that are working on creating standardized reporting guidelines for generative AI use. So that would be something akin to Consort for clinical trials or Prisma for systematic reviews. You might be familiar with those. And that's expected to undergo some pilot testing soon. So we'll see how that might take a while to emerge. So predatory publishing and the problems of predatory publishing might be familiar to lots of you by now. If you're not familiar with it, I would recommend checking out the Research Medical Library website and some of the links in the handout because there's more information there. But in short, predatory publishers and predatory journals are deceptive money-making enterprises that don't have any particular concern for supporting and disseminating good science. They charge publication fees, but they don't provide any of the services like screening, peer review, editing, permanent archiving that a legitimate open access journal would. You're probably familiar with some of their strategies, those oddly worded emails, the awkward looking websites that advertise implausibly quick peer review, like 48 hours, or implausibly quick publication, a lack of transparency about fees. And they just waste people's time and money. It could be in the tens to hundreds of millions of dollars a year. They add bad data to the scientific literature, and they can be very confusing to the public and to policymakers. So just like some of the concerns surrounding AI, the problem with predatory publishers has to do with trust and transparency and responsibility. And there are concerns emerging that AI could make predatory publishers' activities easier to pull off and more profitable. So one issue is the promise of quick peer review and publication, which these journals are already engaging in. It's very hard to find qualified peer reviewers, and reviewers are often kind of inundated with requests for reviews. And as a result, review times are getting longer. So a journal that can promise a quick review for a fee might look pretty enticing to a researcher who's, under the pressure of publish or perish. And if that review is AI generated, oh well, So in turn, the quick reviews could enable the journal to publish more articles and increase their profits. A second concern is that just constantly regenerating, recycling, or generating new text through chatbots could be used to create the appearance of a long-established journal, or to create the impression that a journal has proper permanent archiving practices when it doesn't. And that raises all kinds of concerns about plagiarism and fraud. And then the third concern is that the kind of idiosyncratic language that often gives away those emails and websites and articles might become harder to detect with AI written text. As if you've used those chatbots, you know that they write pretty well. And it's currently not possible with the existing tools to reliably detect AI generated text. On the other hand, some people have suggested that ChatGPT could actually lessen the demand for predatory journals. Lots of research shows that one reason why researchers resort to publishing in these journals is a language barrier. And ChatGPT is really good at producing, grammatical, readable English text, other languages too, actually. So it may help researchers with, whose English proficiency is limited, to gain better access to legitimate journals and therefore make it less necessary to seek out these predatory journals. So these are all possible developments, and the library will keep you updated on new things as they happen. So I asked ChatGPT all kinds of questions like, what's the safe temperature for cooking chicken? Or what are some things to do in Chicago? So I wondered whether I could just ask it whether a particular journal is predatory. And it turned out, of course, that someone has already studied this more systematically. Their answer was maybe. In that study, ChatGPT correctly identified 92.5% of predatory journals and 71% of legitimate journals. So a limitation there is that those journals were classified as predatory or legitimate based on some human-generated lists. And those lists tend to become outdated pretty quickly and can reflect some of the biases of the humans who compile them. So it's not clear whether ChatGPT can make this discrimination, whether it can correctly classify a specific journal on its own. But I tried it anyway, and I asked ChatGPT whether it could tell me if a journal is predatory, and it said, of course. So I asked both ChatGPT and Microsoft Copilot specifically about a journal that raised a few red flags for me, something called the International Journal of Advanced Research, very specific title there. On the left is ChatGPT's response, and it told me that this journal had indeed been flagged as predatory by unspecified researchers and organizations, but it hesitated to give me a definitive answer, which seemed to contradict, of course, I can check that for you. It did give me some general advice. It was sound advice on how to evaluate a journal. It's very similar to the advice that we and others who are concerned about this topic would give. And I thought what was interesting about ChatGPT's response was that it urged me several times to exercise my own judgment when evaluating a journal. Microsoft Copilot, which is based on the same technology, but a little bit different, and it's built into Microsoft 365 now. So if you've updated, you can see this. That chatbot was a lot more confident. It said, this journal is considered predatory. It gave a source for that claim. Interestingly, that was Beall's list, which is a list of potentially predatory journals that was shut down and hasn't been updated since 2017. It provided links to a couple of sites that also claim that this journal is predatory and explaining why. It was odd to me that I haven't heard of either of these, journalsearches.com or openaccessjournal.com with access spelled incorrectly. So I don't know how it chose those sites, but the differences between the approaches of the two chatbots was interesting to me. Lots of people are working on other kinds of AI tools specifically for recognizing predatory journals. So one of these is kind of crawls the web. similar to tools that look for hoax news or phishing sites, things like that. And unfortunately, in one test, it didn't perform very reliably. So you can see here that it classified 100% of the thousands of journals published by two of the biggest scientific publishers, Elsevier and Wiley, as predatory. It also classified over 7% of omics journals as normal. And that's kind of interesting because omics was included in this study as a control since omics was ordered by the FTC to pay a $50 million fine for deceptive business practices. So these tools are in development. They're not really reliable yet, but I'm sure they will become more reliable as things go along. So as with everything to do with AI and as with everything to do with predatory publishing, you need to continue to use your own human judgment for now. There are a few AI-related items that we think you can incorporate into your journal evaluation process as you're choosing. So the first thing is to check to be sure the journal has a clear policy on permissible use of AI and how AI use should be disclosed. By now, most reputable journals will have some kind of policy. 6 months ago, 8 months ago, that might not have been true, but by now they do mostly. And that policy should resemble those principles from ICMJE and COPE that we discussed earlier. Now, of course, predatory journals don't always follow their policies, even if they have policies. So you want to look for a few telltale signs of AI use or suspicious signs of AI use in recently published articles. And, one caveat of this is that even legitimate journals have let this stuff slip through. But even even in a legitimate journal, if there are patterns of AI use or really obvious AI use, that seems to be, to me at least, a sign of inattentive screening, review, and editing. And of course, you want to publish your work in journals that will treat it with care and attention and help you make it better. Another thing you can do is triangulate the results of multiple different sources, reliable sources, to see if you find persistent and well-founded patterns of inappropriate AI use in a journal. Again, you should interpret this with caution. This stuff is slipping through in reputable journals, and it's also very difficult to conclusively state, in most cases, that a bit of text was AI generated. So you're looking really for patterns and kind of if multiple sources are reporting the same kinds of problems, you don't want to judge solely on the basis of one article having slipped through. So we talked about the policy issue already, so we'll look at the second two now. So a few signs of potentially inappropriate AI use are some telltale phrases that chatbots tend to use. Nonsense images or images that are clearly incorrect or weird in some way, either fabricated or inaccurate citations. And I put maybe on this because there are some characteristics of chatbot writing that you might be able to detect, but humans are really not very good at detecting which text is written by a chatbot and which is written by humans. So this is a more subjective one. So obviously the most reliable sign is when ChatGPT's output or even its interface gets copied and pasted right into text and no one in the publication process either noticed or cared. So on the left, you have an article that has regenerate response at the bottom of it. That is a button in ChatGPT. When they copied text, they accidentally also copied the button and just pasted it in, and nobody caught it. Another characteristic of ChatGPT, the way it speaks is that it often says, when you ask for something, it says, certainly, here is, and this table has that text in it. Certainly, here is the tabular representation. Obviously, that is not something a person would write when they're presenting a table. So that shouldn't be there. It's a pretty obvious sign. And then in a particularly impressive amount of AI generated text here, This is actually from a reputable journal, the one on the right. But this made it in. It actually says, "I'm very sorry, but I am an AI language model. For specific cases, it is essential to consult with a medical professional who has access to the patient's records." I mean, this is a case report. Presumably, those are the authors. And that one made the news media because it was sort of so impressively long, really. There are some characteristics of AI generated images that you can look for. If you're an astute observer, sometimes you can distinguish these. This one does not require a lot of astuteness, other than the big retracted label across it. A few of those signs are sort of nonsense objects or objects that don't make sense. So in pictures of people, you'll often see that they have like way too many teeth. I don't know what these symbols are supposed to be. They kind of look like donuts and ducks, and I'm not sure what that thing at the bottom is at all. They have garbled text. AI image generators are not great at producing actual words. So you see things like trem cation of jepens on here, or stats peplication, words that aren't words. And just illogical things, like here, there's arrows that don't point to anything and are redundant. It's not what the Jack stat pathway actually looks like. And the whole thing is cartoonish, right? Another thing to look for is a pattern of reliance on questionable or even fake references. ChatGPT is notorious for doing this, right? If you ask it to cite its sources, it will produce a few references. When you they look legit. You investigate them, you find out that their DOIs don't lead anywhere. They lead to a different article. And then ChatGPT will tell you, oh, okay, here's the real references. And those turn out to be wrong too. If a lot of these kinds of references are slipping through, that means the journal isn't doing its job very well. In this case, you see an article that was flagged on PubPeer as having 10 questionable references in it, most of which were retractions. My guess would be that those were retracted since early 22, which is when ChatGPT training period ended. So this is the more subjective thing. You can look for a few stylistic characteristics of chatbot output. Again, this is probably unprovable, but it's just something to think about and investigate further. This requires a really careful reader who can really spot these kind of subtle aspects of writing. But recently, authors have started to raise some concerns about potentially AI-generated peer reviews. And those suspicions tend to be based on these kind of stylistic aspects of the writing. A sense that the chatbot's output is quite general and mostly consists of summary rather than the specific expertise and context that you would expect a human reviewer to bring to a peer review. Most journals actually don't have very detailed guidelines for peer reviewers' use of AI, not like authors. And because peer review is really time consuming, you can easily imagine that somebody's going to ask ChatGPT to do this work. So I ran a little experiment to compare the writing in a review written by a chatbot with one written by an actual human peer reviewer. So I entered the abstract of a published open access article from the journal eLife into ChatGPT and asked it to review it. eLife publishes reviewers' reports alongside articles, so I was able to compare the ChatGPT review with the real human review. And these are just some excerpts. So on the left, you can see that ChatGPT is pretty generic. It kind of sounds like a peer review. It asks for things peer reviewers sometimes ask for, like further elucidation of the molecular mechanisms, and suggests things like strengthening the robustness and translating the findings into clinical practice. But when you think about it, they're not very specific to this manuscript. They're just kind of almost like stock phrases or cliches. And the rest of the ChatGPT review is mostly consists of summary and kind of rephrasing the abstract that I entered. And that's one of ChatGPT's strengths. It's really good at summarizing information. The human review, on the other hand, kind of engages with the article from the point of view of someone who understands the topic and has experience to draw on. So it does include quite a bit of summary, even a quote, but the human reviewer notices things like contradictory statements, results that don't seem fully plausible, conclusions that are inconsistent with the data, experimental models that might not be the best ones. And the human reviewer actually asks a question, right? The protein level was decreased. Why? Why? What's the explanation? And there's even a little, I don't want to say emotional language, but subjective language here. So things like seem and puzzling and sufficiently convincing. ChatGPT doesn't use those kinds of words. It doesn't have opinions. And it's not that the ChatGPT review is necessarily bad. It's just not super helpful. And human reviewers are perfectly capable of writing in generalities and using cliches and being unhelpful. So this is in no way definitive signs of AI, but these are some stylistic markers that people are noticing in text that may or may not be AI generated. And interestingly, when I asked Copilot, what are some stylistic markers of GPT, the way GPT writes, it raised a lot of these same features. So it's, I don't know if that means it's self-aware, but. And finally, another thing you can do is use multiple reliable sources and kind of triangulate among them when you're choosing a journal or evaluating it. So you don't want to rely on any single one. These are some that we typically recommend looking at, and you can find more information about these on our website. They all have their strengths and weaknesses. And of course, predatory publishers are constantly like refining their strategies, using new emails, using new URLs, changing their names. So it's hard for any one source to keep up. Something you can do is Google the name of the journal with the tag cite. So just cite with a colon and then the name of the domain you'd like to search. You could look at something like Retraction Watch or PubPeer, and those you can pull up mentions of that journal, say on something like Retraction Watch. Try asking Copilot. Again, it's who knows how reliable it is, but it is sort of connected to the active internet in a way that ChatGPT is not. So what do you do if you have concerns about undisclosed or inappropriate use of AI in a review, in a manuscript you're reviewing, in a published article? All these are basically the same. It can be really tempting to try to call somebody out if you just see regenerate response in there. But remember that the goal is to ensure the integrity of the peer review and publication process, not to attack an individual or a group of authors. So you want to treat this as you would any other suspicion of misconduct. You should contact the journal editor first. It's their job to make sure that they're publishing high quality work. You should keep your language neutral, polite, impersonal. Don't take an accusatory tone. Provide as much specific and detailed evidence as you can to support your claim. And remember that AI detection software is not particularly accurate yet. And so just saying, I ran this through aidetector.com isn't probably enough evidence. If this is a review of a manuscript you submitted, I would recommend not challenging the decision, but just asking the editor to ask the reviewer for some clarification of the key points so that you can improve the manuscript. And if it's a published article, still, I think, when you spot something like certainly here are, certainly start with the journal editor. Also, post-publication are becoming some kind of important venues where people are sharing and commenting on this sort of thing. Now, an editor of a predatory journal doesn't care much if you spot research misconduct. So if you think you have inadvertently published in one of those journals, there are a few steps you can try. My colleague Madison Semro wrote a great recent article in Library News, which there's a link in the handout as well to that article and a whole series, and that could be helpful. So that's what I have. In the interest of full disclosure, I created lots of these images with Microsoft Image Creator. and used ChatGPT to do a little bit of the drafting, but I edited and reviewed all that information for space and for accuracy. So I'll put our contact information up here while you type any questions that you may have into the chat. Okay, last chance for questions. Yeah, I thought it was important to kind of experiment with it to see what it could do. So to give you a little more context, I initially had to set up this class several months ago and wasn't quite sure what I wanted it to be about. So I asked ChatGPT to write me a class description for a class about predatory publishing and AI. And it gave me a few very general things, and then I honed them. So, and the image generator is just super fun to play with. Um, but it really is, I think, one of the things I learned is that getting the prompts right, really refining the prompts so that it outputs what you want is challenging. And so that, yeah, that was kind of a little bit hard to do. Some of the images that I wanted, or some of the text that I wanted, it wasn't quite producing what I felt like I needed. Yeah, so you can really, it's worth playing with. I wouldn't write your article with it, but. So if nobody has any additional questions, I'm gonna sign off and end the meeting. If you do think of anything later, please contact us. We're always willing, the librarians and editors are here to help you, navigate selecting a journal, keep you up to date on what's going on with AI and scientific publishing. So we're here to help, and that's how to reach us. So thanks, everybody.